In economics class today, we want to further analyze under public finance that we call public finance 3. That is, here we want to look at incident of taxation. Incident of taxation. This implies the point at which tax burden finally rests. That is, who finally pays the tax. Under direct tax, the taxpayers bear the burden of it, such as personal income taxpayers, corporate bodies, and so on and so forth. That is, under direct tax, the taxpayers are the one bearing the burden of the tax. They are not sharing the tax with anybody. While under indirect tax, the burden of such tax is shared between the producer and consumers. When we are talking about indirect tax, we are talking about tax levied on goods and services. So, who are the people that will bear the burden? So here, the tax is shared between the producer and consumer, depending on the price elasticity of demand for the commodity taxed. That is, we have to look at the commodity being taxed by these people, looking into the price elasticity of the demand for the commodity. So here we'll be able to know how they are going to share the burden of tax, if it is only producer that will carry the burden, or consumer will be the only one that will bear the burden, or they will share the burden of tax. But if they are going to share the burden of that tax, what is going to be the share of producer and the share of a consumer? That is what we are going to look into in our network, the next area now. Incident of indirect tax when demand is perfectly elastic. We have analyzed price elasticity of demand, that we have about 5 types. The first one, among them, we have perfectly elastic demand. I would say perfectly elastic demand implies that a situation where there's a constant price, but quantity demanded changes from one level to another, but the price is constant. Now, not only that, we also analyze demand and supply in the interaction, that where demand and supply meet will be referred to as an equilibrium price. Under this analysis, we are going to use demand curve and supply curve. Now, under the first one, this is our demand curve. PD is the demand curve, because we said perfectly elastic demand indicates that the price is constant, but quantity demanded is changing. Now, we have QD, we have SS. At this point, there is equilibrium, where the price is P and quantity demanded, or equilibrium quantity is QT. Equilibrium quantity is QT, while equilibrium price is P. Now, because of tax that government impose on goods, is going to lead to a decrease in supply. That is, a backward shift in supply curve because of the tax. And whenever there is a backward shift in supply curve, it indicates that supply will reduce. That's why we have the Q2 moving down to Q1 as a result of the tax. Now, we have created S1 as a result of the tax. Now, something is going to happen here, and what is that thing? That is, who is going to bear the burden of the tax? Is it the buyer or the seller? Or at times you can call it the producer. So here, the seller or the producer cannot transfer or shift the burden of that tax onto the consumer. So the producer or the seller will bear the burden of that, because if the producer or the seller make an attempt to increase the price, the buyer or the consumer will decide to leave the producer. So in that case, demand will fall down to 0. So the producer or the seller will not make an attempt in increasing the price. So what will they do? They will bear the whole burden of that tax, because the demand for the commodity is perfectly elastic. So what is the value or the amount of, or the burden that the producer or the seller will bear? So the burden is going to be P, H, F, P1. So the shaded portion is the tax that the producer or the seller will bear. So without shifting any amount down to the producer. So that's why I said that the producer or seller bears the whole burden of tax when it is a perfectly elastic demand. The second incident of indirect tax under perfectly inelastic demand. We'll say that when a product is perfectly elastic demand, it implies that the price can change, but quantity demanded is constant. Now, we are trying to look at the interaction of demand and supply before we go into the burden of that tax. When you look at this supply of SS, where demand is what is just D. So there is equilibrium quantity here, Q1. So this is H, equilibrium point, and this is equilibrium price, P. So that is before government imposed tax on such commodity, the equilibrium point is H, equilibrium price is P, equilibrium quantity is Q star. Now government has imposed tax on the commodity. So we understand that whenever there is a tax, particularly there is an increase in tax, supply curve will shift backward. That's why we have S1, and demand is still constant at Q or star. So new equilibrium point is now E, while equilibrium quantity is still Q star, while equilibrium price is P1. Here, consumers will bear the burden of the tax because demand will still not change if there is an increase in price. So the sellers and producers can make an attempt here to shift the whole burden onto the consumer because the quantity will still be constant. So when we are talking about indirect tax under perfectly inelastic demand, consumers are the ones that bear the whole burden of the tax. And what is going to be the amount? So it's going to be P1 E H P. So the shaded portion here refers to as a tax that the consumer will bear as a result of a perfectly inelastic demand that the commodity is. The third one, incident of indirect tax under unitary elastic demand. It is when you have unit elasticity of demand. We understand that here the price and the change in quantity demanded, change in price and change in quantity demanded are equal, but that is the product is or the commodity is elastic, is unitary elastic demand. But a situation where we have tax, how are they going to share the burden of the tax? Or who will take the responsibility? Who will take the burden of that tax? Now, let us look at what we have on the board. This is demand curve. These are supply curve here. The two curves meet here. We call it equilibrium point. So that's our equilibrium point. If that is E1 is the equilibrium point, while quantity demand, equilibrium quantity, let's call it Q star, while equilibrium price is P1. That is at E1, at point E1, we have equilibrium point where demand and supply meet. Then Q star refers to as equilibrium quantity, while P1 refers to as equilibrium price. Now, with tax imposed on the commodity, there will be a backward shift in supply curve. That's why we have S1. That is the supply curve has shifted backwardly because of the tax. New equilibrium point will be established. That is where we have point E, and the equilibrium quantity will be just Q, while the previous quantity is Q or QX. Now, new equilibrium quantity has been established because of new equilibrium point. The equilibrium price will have P2. Now, who will bear the burden of the tax? So far, the commodity is unit elasticity of demand. The two will bear the burden of the tax equally. Both the producer and the consumers will bear the burden of the tax equally. But how are they going to bear it? Let's look at it from the diagram we have. Our tax is EK. EK, that is from year to year, refers to as the tax. So the burden that the producer will bear will be KF. KF, that is the whole body will have P1 F K C. So the shaded portion with what? With black marker refers to producer share, while the shaded portion with blue marker refers to the consumer share. This P2 E F P1. So what we have here is equal to the one we have here. So that's why I said the two institutions, producer and consumer, will share the burden equally because the elasticity of that commodity is unitary. So no one will take larger share. That is, they will bear it equally. That is what we have under unitary elastic demand. The fourth one, incidence of indirect tax under elastic demand. We said elastic demand implies a situation where a small change in price will lead to a greater change in quantity demanded. Where there is tax, who will bear the burden? Let us look at it from the diagram we have. These are our price axis, these are our quantity axis. Then we have equilibrium here, E1. So demand curve meets supply curve. That's equilibrium point. Why equilibrium quantity is for Q5. What's going to be the price? Equilibrium price is P1. Now, having imposed tax, supply curve will shift backward. So that's why we have S1, S1. And what is going to happen when it comes to sharing of the work, sharing the burden of the tax? Now, we have seen S1, S1 here. Now, new equilibrium point will be created at this point because demand is still constant. So we have the equilibrium point E, where equilibrium quantity is Q2, equilibrium price is P1, right? So here, P, the tax would have be EH. That is, the whole tax will be what? EH. Then who is going to take the larger share? Here, the producers and the consumer will share the burden of the tax. But for them to share the burden of the tax, the producer will take the larger part of the share. So that's how we have it from what? KH. The tax because the producer or the seller will pay is KH, while the consumer will pay what? EK. So the portion here is greater than the portion here. So the old tax that the consumer will pay will just be PEKP1, shaded with what? With a green marker, while the one shaded with black marker will be the portion of the producer, P1KAC. Right? So it implies that if the product is elastic demand, producers or the sellers will pay the larger share of the tax, while consumer will take part of the share. So that's what we call elastic demand in terms of incidence of indirect tax. So here, producer bear the larger share and consumers bear the smaller share. The fifth one, incidence of indirect tax under inelastic demand. When you are talking about inelastic demand, it implies a situation where the change in quantity demanded is less than the change in price. So normally we have it to be less than 1. But if the product is inelastic demand, then what is going to be the burden of the tax? Who will bear it? Or how are they going to share the burden? Here we understand that the two institutions, the producer and the consumer, will share the burden of the tax. But how are they going to share the burden of the tax is what we are going to demonstrate on the diagram now. This is the price axis, this is the quantity axis. This supply curve, this demand curve. So we have equilibrium point to be point E, while equilibrium quantity is Q3, equilibrium price is P1. Now, having imposed tax on the commodity, supply curve will shift backward. We have S1, S1. So new equilibrium point is now E1, while quantity is Q1, price is P4. Now, how are they going to share the burden of the tax? The tax that they are going to pay is E1T. It is the whole tax they are going to pay with respect to that commodity that is inelastic is E1T. So to share the burden of the tax now, the producer will take KT. So the total tax that the producer will now pay will now be C1KTC. This is the portion that the producer will pay or the seller will pay. Now for the consumer will now pay P4 E1KP1. So this is the total tax that the consumer will pay. So this is the portion that will belong to consumer in terms of burden of the tax. So it's larger than this one. So the shaded portion refers to the consumer share in terms of the burden of the share, in terms of the burden of the tax. While producer share will be what? This shaded portion with black marker belong to producer. That is the body that the producer or the seller we pay to the government. So the total tax is E1P4CT. So looking at the diagram critically, you see that the consumers will pay this portion, producer will pay this portion. So in summarize, with respect to inelastic demand, here consumers bear the greater burden while producer takes smaller burden of the tax. Examples. Question 1. Indirect taxes are taxes which A. are levied on the incomes and profits of individuals and firms. B. always affect the producers only. C. are levied on goods and services purchased by individuals and firms. D. are based on regressive. The right answer is C. are levied on goods and services purchased by individuals and firms. Question 2. Tax evasion in economics means A. false declaration of assets. B. pay tax only as and when due. C. declaration of assets. D. quarreling with tax collectors. The right answer is A. false declaration of assets. Question 3. Who bears the greater burden of the indirect tax when the demand for a commodity is inelastic? B. A. wholesaler. B. consumer. C. shareholder. D. producer. The right answer is B. consumer bears the greater burden of the indirect tax.